Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think we're ready to start. Your Excellency, Dame Paulette Louise, Mr. Gordon Charles, son of Mrs. Patricia Charles, Monsignor Dr. Patrick Power Anthony, Dr. Adrian Auger, our distinguished lecturer for the evening and the son-in-law of Mrs. Charles, Mr. Clarence Henry, President of the local chapter of the UWI Alumni Association, Ms. Julian Joseph, Chapter Chair of the Student Guild, the UWI community, both at home and abroad, our online community, distinguished guests. It is with great pleasure and a full heart that I welcome all of you to our campus this evening. It has been far too long. Those of you who have faithfully attended our memorial lectures over many years would be aware that this 10th anniversary celebration in memory of our beloved tutor, Mrs. Patricia Charles, resident tutor, Mrs. Patricia Charles, was long overdue. Like so many aspects of our lives, our memorial lectures fell victim to the pandemic and then, ironically, to the stubbornness of this head of an online campus, determined that only an actual physical lecture delivered by Dr. Auger was befitting of this 10th anniversary milestone. Then, in the blink of an eye, it was 2024. Embracing change and accepting the need to rethink old approaches can be hard, yet change is an unavoidable constant in our lives. Our jobs and our roles change, our organizations revamp their strategies, and we need to adapt and adjust in order to survive and hopefully to thrive. This truth was understood only too well by Mrs. Patricia Charles. One can only imagine how difficult it must have been initially to have left her home and family in Canada, to move halfway across the world to begin a new life with her St. Lucian husband, Ferrell Bam Charles, in 1959. Yet she embraced the change with purpose and passion, becoming deeply involved in development work in her adopted homeland, St. Lucia, through her work as the 4th resident tutor of the then extramural department of the UWI from 1963 until her retirement in 1977. Described as a dedicated daughter and committed servant who worked assiduously to improve opportunities for and the quality of education in St. Lucia, Mrs. Charles became the change she wanted to see, a driving force for change in the island, especially with her focus in the field of drama and dance. Her work in the areas of social development and leadership, outreach and public relations, illustrated the importance of the university at work in the cause of national development. During her early years as resident tutor, Mrs. Charles served on numerous local committees, including the Planning Committee for Roddy Walcott's St. Lucia Drama Festival in 1965, the St. Lucia Archaeological and Historical Society, and the Alliance Française. She spearheaded many projects during her tenure at the UWI's extramural department, which were eventually taken over by other local bodies and associations. This work by Mrs. Charles was the embodiment of the extramural department's role as an incubator for furthering education the education of adult learners, as well as community intellectual, social, and cultural development across the region. As resident tutor, Patricia Charles also targeted the tourist industry in the early 1960s. She organized many informative and educational seminars for everyday people in St. Lucia, which focused on history, the folklore, flora and the fauna, historic sites, and even the constitutional and economic development of the country. These activities were designed to bring about change, to build appropriate infrastructure for increasing the productivity of that sector. In 1966, the Creative and Performing Arts Society was formed in St. Lucia and was primarily a training operation supported by Mrs. Charles through the extramural department in St. Lucia. The group produced both indigenous and British plays until 1974, when they disbanded. Mrs. Charles, along with other resident tutors in the region, also engaged in the foundation of the Caribbean Regional Council for Adult Education. That was in 1978. And in 1979, this council established a certificate course aimed at training teachers and facilitators in the field of adult education. She was also instrumental in founding the National Research Development Foundation, NRDF, on the island, an organization which continues to serve the development needs of the community to this day. A member of the Open Campus Council from 2007 to 2009, Mrs. Charles was chair of the UWI Open Campus St. Lucia Advisory Committee. She continued to work for the Open Campus until the day she became ill. Her last experience with the Open Campus in her official capacity was her attendance at the October 16, 2009 induction ceremony for the Pro Vice Chancellor and Principal of the Open Campus, Professor Hazel Simmons MacDonald. Her passing on February 24, 2010 prompted an outpouring of sentiment from around the region and indeed the world. Former students, co-workers, colleagues, professional associates, and representatives of the many organizations she had served expressed their condolences and immense admiration for this St. Lucian educator, development specialist, and cultural activist who poured her energy into causes which would improve the human condition in profound and sustainable ways. Hers was a life well lived, an example to us all. And so with these few words, I welcome you once again to our lecture, and I now invite Mrs. Sigyuthani Bryan to the podium to introduce our guest lecturer.
Good night, everyone. Dr. Adrienne Auger is an economic development consultant with extensive private and public sector experience across the Caribbean and beyond. He has conducted assignments on behalf of the governments of St. Lucia and Grenada, CARICOM, EU, USAID, CARICOM, the OECS, and the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center. A former chief economist in the Ministry of Finance and Planning in St. Lucia, Dr. Auger returned to the public service to assist a new government with policy reorientation. Dr. Auger majored in economics and political science at the University of Western Ontario, Canada, and he holds a master's degree with distinction in development banking from American University. He has been a fellow of the Economic Development Institute and the U.S. Center for Strategic and International Studies. From 1985 to 1988, he worked at the World Bank as the economic assistant to the executive director for Canada, Ireland, and the Caribbean. With numerous published articles to his credit, Dr. Auger is an acknowledged advocate of good governance and economic policy reform. He is currently the chairman of Landmark Group and managing director of its flagship company, Landmark Events Limited. Dr. Auger was named Entrepreneur of the Year 2010. In October 2012, He received an honorary doctorate from the University of the West Indies for his contribution to regional development and culture. He is also an award-winning writer and producer and a published poet with several theater productions. In 2016, he was awarded the St. Lucia Medal of Merit, Gold. He is married with 3 children and lives where? In the lovely island of St. Lucia. So please help me welcome our speaker for this evening, Dr. Adrian Auger.
Slight structural adjustment here. Okay. Good evening. Hold on. Always the producer. Can't help myself. Okay. Good evening, Your Excellency. Good evening, Father. Good evening, brother. My fans from down the coast. Our university colleagues online, I know you're listening. I'll just thank you very much for inquiring and expressing willingness to join us. Who else have I missed? Jeff, I haven't seen in ages. And everyone else here, the regulars, thank you for being here. When I drove up and saw 2 parking spaces, I was very disappointed. I thought by 6:30 this thing would have been sold out. But thanks to technology, people are listening at home, so we have no choice but to welcome them also. But I really was hoping for standing room only, so if you bring me back for the 20th, we'll have to work on that. I have a instinctive, caution about technology, which seems to be well-founded here. And so we have a printed version, just in case. I don't think I'm getting Wi-Fi, that's probably why. So ladies and gentlemen, here we go. Rethinking our development. As the poster suggests, the hour is really the critical word. I'm trying to make this not a conversation about development as much as a conversation about rethinking. So those of you who have come here for a treatise on GDP are going to be very disappointed. As economist, artist, business owner, employer, father, grandfather, citizen and taxpayer, I presume that it will always be important to contemplate the matter of our own development, to ask ourselves and each other, what is this enterprise in which we as a country, nation, economy and community are allegedly engaged? And what indeed is this thing called development, this holy grail that we are trying to achieve? What advancement, what amelioration are we hoping for, and why, for whom, and when? Is there any urgency, some pace or path we should maintain, benchmarks to be attained and held tenaciously so that we do not recede into our former darkness of oppression, neglect, poverty, disease, despair? How many of us are there now, today, tomorrow, forever? To avoid such questions is to be both stupid and dishonest, bad enough as separate traits, but even more ominous together. And if anyone particular comes to mind, please try and pay attention. To avoid such questions is to be irrational and irreverent of our own human existence, life, need, endeavor, ambition, dreams. And we are nothing without our dreams. I need to dream, but cannot sleep. And so I vow to keep the lamp wick trimmed, to toil while islands slumber to oblivion, to warn that trouble walks 3 steps behind and will not hesitate to find me in my house. And I will be reading excerpts from Navel String, published in 2012. So if I wax into poetry, you will know that the publication is available on Amazon. At this forum and this juncture, let us start the rethink here, in this house, and at this particular juncture, because Pat Charles, who worked here and in whose honor we now gather, was both hopeful and rational. Her vision was holistic and inclusive. She believed in community, the substantiality and sustainability derived from overt, deliberate consensus. And she did not arrive at these thoughts conveniently. She considered, observed, researched, consulted. She verified, engaged, and shared. She embraced, nurtured, instructed, and led. And if necessary, as last resorts, she coerced and demanded. But far more importantly, Pat recognized the fertile combination of need and opportunity, and in the light of such optimism, devoted much of her life to the development of this country that she adopted and its people, who should remain the unblurred focus of this conversation. If we are the forum, then the juncture I invoke is our 45th year as an independent nation, knowing full well that Pat would have accorded some urgency to an assessment of where we are and where we might be heading. Call it project monitoring and evaluation. And imagine that she, Pat, might be calling quite a few of us to account for our stewardship in that regard. Forthright and definitive, sometimes obliviously so, she was always driven by the very prospect of development, and it was to the furtherance of that cause she lent her expansive wisdom and energies. I shall always be grateful for the breadth she brought to my life, and in this feckless age of apparent indifference to so many development imperatives, education, language, culture, art, heritage, environment, and governance, I believe we could use some of Pat's unadulterated passion in the shaping of national affairs. By way of further acknowledgement, and in similar spirit, I must thank Leslie Crane Mitchell, head of the UWI Global Campus St. Lucia, for inviting me to plant this 10-year marker, for accepting my choice of topic, and for trusting that I would deliver something suitably inspiring and hopefully provocative. I certainly intend to plant a fertile seed or two in this soil where navel strings were once buried under immortal trees, to root us to the hopeful dreams of our ancestors. And lacking alternative device, we erected trees, great branching memories to bless the spot, where to more abundant life we bound ourselves, mere shriveling flesh, proffered to eternal earth, to rock, to sinew, to bone, to root, and so forever to this place, unto the breach. With such fruitfulness in mind, let us firmly situate this idea of rethinking our development. And in the interest of both rigor and realism, let us establish some boundaries around this very broad, innocuous term, development, too often manipulated, increasingly ignored, and conveniently misunderstood. A reasonably centrist definition of development can be adopted from the global institution we joined in June 1980, just months after regaining independence from Britain. I refer to the World Bank and its current mix of 6 development indicators, and they are social progress, quality of life, economic development, physical infrastructure, environment, and government performance. The inclusion of social progress, quality of life, and environment are instructive. They are instructive additions which make for a more enlightened matrix in the measurement of development, certainly more progressive than mere GDP and per capita stats, however important those two may be. It is time to incorporate such qualitative indices into our own annual economic and social review. Other Bretton Woods institutions like the IMF and leading multilateral development agencies agree on these indicators. And of course they would agree, being all cut from the same post-war George Marshall fabric. Some of you would know of the Marshall Plan, but the irony we must still live with is that the purpose of the 1947 Marshall Plan was to catalyze economic recovery in Western Europe and secure US geopolitical influence over the world. By 1962, in a contagious folly of divisive single-mindedness, our Caribbean leaders fractured the West Indies Federation and lined up to sign up to that very doctrine of hegemonic domination while posing as heroic liberators of their back home people. In contemporary parlance, we all drank that Kool-Aid, complete with ice cubes, red cherry, and little paper umbrella. And with that acquiescence, we adopted an insidious philosophy, a version of development which had little to do with dignity, equity, autonomy, or self-determination. We bought into the dominant world order in the role of satellite states, nuzzling the armpit of America. Soon after, Reaganomics and Thatcherism dismantled all notions of the state as guardian of patrimonies, as enlightened regulator, as intelligent arbiter. The poor, the weak, and marginalized of the world and of our regional economies became collateral damage, acceptable losses left to fend for themselves. It was the birth of the worst period of income inequality this world has ever seen. On the cusp of 2 centuries, amid millennium distractions, the king bought himself new clothes: Chanel, Gucci, Vuitton, Prada. Oil prices were down. The Arab upstarts were back in their places. Protectionism was dead and the world was ripe again with low-wage labor, cheap energy, and scandal margins. The old schema had been rechristened globalization and outfitted with a fresh lexicon to insinuate that a tide of unbridled growth would raise all ships. More Kool-Aid. For the prospect of pennies, we opened our borders, dismantled trade barriers, sold off our airwaves, surrendered sovereignty to WTO, FATCA, to CITES, and more. We followed the paid piper into an old rebranded carnival. Locally and regionally, the extractive state apparatus, first imposed by colonial powers to transfuse wealth out of these islands, remained insatiably in place as facilitator of vested post-colonial interest, now dressed as global multinationals, posing as purveyors of perfect capitalism and sacred democracy. For roughly 2 decades, $8 flowed. Compliant leaders were happy. But any who dared oppose the dominant vision of this brave new world in favor of hybrid, homegrown development solutions was systematically undermined and destroyed. Mali, Burnham, and later Bishop. How far? How far? So the question of how far we have come must inevitably recur. Incidentally, Grenada celebrates its 50th anniversary of independence as we speak. Not so coincidentally, it is also the 45th anniversary of the Grenada Revolution, an aberration on the smooth complexion of the Grenadian memory. St. Lucia's own dysfunction did not wait 5 years to erupt. We did it all in '79. Socialist flirtations, independence, elections, regime change, city riot. These were heady days. Imagine the political dynamics. Grenada goes independent under Gary in '74. But soon enough, Morris Bishop is brewing some strong Cuban coffee on Eric Gary's stove. Dominica goes independent under Patrick John in '78. But Rosie Douglas is encroaching on conservative political turf. That same ruler Douglas who at the age of 18 had the temerity to write the Prime Minister of Canada and demand a student visa. And the Prime Minister of Canada sent a minister to collect him at the airport when indeed his visa was activated. Then Rosie Douglas, most ungratefully, upset white people in Canada and embarrassed his own bourgeoisie back home by staging an anti-racism protest in 1969 at George William University in Quebec. How could black people be so ungrateful? Meanwhile, St. Lucia, in high-stress mode, is racing to independence, now slated for February 1979. But Premier Compton is losing his 30-year grip, and George, Josie, and Louise are co-starring in what should be Compton's Oscar-winning movie. Grenada overthrows its despot Gary in March 1979. By June that same year, Compton loses the St. Lucia election, 5 seats to 12. Meanwhile, St. Vincent is struggling to finish last under Premier Milton Cato. In October '79, they are due to become independent. Compton's cousin, James Mitchell, is waiting for a divided house to make him king. And confessed socialist Ralph Gonsalves is waiting behind him in the wings. It won't be long now, and despite many close calls, Ralph survives as monarch of St. Vincent. And so the point is, we have been too reluctant in our own evolution, conservative in our politics, comatose in our imagination, imitative in our development philosophy, in a single word, afraid. Again and again, and even now, new initiatives are systematically abandoned to return too quickly to the status quo ante. Despite towering achievements on the world stage across 5 continents, we are now intellectually timid, non-cohesive, fractious. We have a history of avoiding change, avoiding challenge. We finish little, we do not endure or act strategically, and so the development dividend eludes us. When Grenada abandoned old, jaded development pathways to explore new cooperative options, we should have made room for this bold, modern replacement of Gary's corrupt and inadequate vehicle, which would never have transported the Grenadian people to prosperity. Imagine the hypocrisy. We plotted with conservative regimes in sister islands and conspired with the United States to thwart Grenada's liberation. And why, you ask, do we disbelieve our leaders? Fast track to November 2021. St. Lucia's new Prime Minister makes his first address to the private sector from the vantage of his 13+2 parliamentary majority. He says bravely, and I'm not imitating him, ours cannot be an explosive progress, an exploitative progress. Attitudes of winner take all and devil take the hindmost are obsolete and unsustainable in our small interwoven society. Our governance system is weak and outmoded. While it may have served us well in the opening chapters of nationhood, it has remained stagnant and has become incompatible with our evolution as a sovereign people in a global community. One simply cannot expect blood from stone. I encourage you to push yourselves to rethink, retool, re-engineer, and reposition. This from the Honorable Prime Minister of St. Lucia, just months after his July victory. But does anyone remember? Does the private sector really want change? And bear in mind that opening up domestic economies, as we did by international agreement, decimated traditional private sectors. So any notion of long-term national commitment has been replaced by the quarterly bottom-line preoccupations of foreign-based players. So why rock that boat? The model works just fine for profits, margins, market share. Sustainability remains a low-priority ideal. When finished here, there will be other lands and lives to plunder. Meanwhile, our poverty and income distribution indicators are worsening. The qualitative indicators are deteriorating. Social progress, quality of life, environment. For the many, these are not happy times. Our more quantitative economic indicators are not faring much better. Our growth rate looks like a crazy zigzag, fluctuating north and south of zero. The St. Lucian economy recorded an average growth rate of 1.1% in the decade up to 2022, with several years of negative growth in between. We have not seen significant growth in this economy for the last 30 years. And we need to think about that. In the search for remedies, we should note that government taxes, that is, money taken out of the productive economy, have been rising constantly at rates around 20%. So the economy is growing at 1.1%, if you're lucky, in a good year, but government taxation, extraction from the economy, is growing around 20%. As recently as 2023, taxes rose 19% from one year to the next. And no one has concluded that there is a strong correlation between high tax and low growth. Well, it is entirely possible that the monolith of government is impoverishing the people. And I offer this because government wages and salaries increased by 10.5% in 2023 over 2022. With other hostage commitments like debt service, there can be no public sector surplus to bring to the development table. The redistributive functions of government have therefore been displaced. So any notion of tax the rich and give to the poor are no longer viable. The government taxes everybody and mostly gives it to itself. We could return to net surplus if we decided to radically reform. But that means shrinking government, which occupies a larger and larger part of the domestic economy. In the meantime, inflationary taxation in a recessionary economy ranks among the worst possible follies of fiscal policy. Government debt has almost doubled since 2012 and is accelerating. Interest payments grew by $8.7 million to $179.7 million, soaking up some 15% of current revenue in 2023 alone. Domestic and foreign interest payments expanded by nearly 5% and 6% respectively. Central government debt held by domestic creditors increased by 11.2% to $1.8 billion in 2022. The result is an increasing dependence on bilateral funds. At last reckoning, some 50% of our total debt was owed to a single foreign government. And that includes not just capital grants for schools and bridges and roads and the like, but budgetary support. We are living beyond our means and spending above our heads. Diplomacy notwithstanding, sooner or later, the man who pays your rent and buys your groceries will handle you roughly and tell you what you can and cannot do. The comparative context. Perhaps in our own minds, blissfully unaware that our triumphant histories are riddled with resistance, with subversion, with rebellion, we are simply too small, too meek, too isolated to think alone. Perhaps our perception of what is possible remains contextualized by the uninspiring achievements of other Caribbean economies in similar scale, circumstance, and lethargy. Perhaps the economic and political constraints of regional arrangements made decades ago are now simply outmoded and too restrictive. Certainly, while we are open to all manner of foreign incursion, regional arrangements remain largely invisible to our daily lives, and they seem not to have increased the health, happiness, or freedom of our people. Perhaps it is time to assess our performance against the rest of the developing world, instead of taking comfort in the misfortunes of our brothers and sisters in the region. Perhaps it is time to assess our performance against global best practice, to realign our thinking to new standards of what is being achieved elsewhere, beyond local and regional circumstances. By way of available examples, and this is somewhat random, Ghana continues to be touted as one of the world's leading emerging economies. With a population around 24 million, it was considered the center of Africa's struggle for independence in the 1950s, under its charismatic first president, Kwame Nkrumah. Did that struggle make them bold, light fires in brains and souls? So whence then cometh our fire? Was our struggle too brief? Our victories too easily won? Our status surrendered by a colonial power who no longer had use of us? Our triumphs passed too soon from fragmented memory? We know that the maturing democracies of the North intentionally impact our domestic circumstances and seek to reinforce rather than ameliorate their hegemonic relationships with countries such as ours. In planning our development, therefore, we should never regard the global environment as a level playing field where morality or equality will naturally prevail. It is for such very reasons that the reparations argument will never hinge on moral grounds. It must be a legal and financial claim if it is to succeed. I presume, moreover, and am persuaded by an abundance of history, that the world cares not for our advancement and will concede nothing to us that we do not demand, deserve, earn, or leverage. To expect otherwise is supreme naivety. And knowing profoundly that we must do for ourselves as only we can do, I am increasingly impatient and intolerant of any inefficiency of time, inadequacy of effort, misallocation of resources, or untouched opportunity which does not address the imperative of our own development, for which we alone are responsible, and to which task we all, without exception, ought to be thoroughly devoted. This much we should have learnt by now. It is a hard thing. It is a hard thing not to cry when this place is part of you, as much as the hand that hold the pen to write this thing, that same pen that your godfather gave you when you passed for college, that pen with its deep, dark ink that flow like a bloodline from it. It's a hard thing. Moving forward. The Sankofa bird of the Akan people looks over its tail with its egg in its beak. That is to say, even when moving forward, history is important. If only because development, however you may define it, is a continuous process along a purposeful path with intent and agency and outcome in mind. Even in the uncertainty of some singular destination at which we may someday arrive, development cannot be the accidental dividend it seems to be now. I am therefore no disciple of trickle-down economics. I do not assume that if you feed the top, the bottom will thrive by miraculous coincidence. That is a disreputable misguidance postulated by fat capitalists in their upper chamber, gloating over a mess of pottage. And they knew it when they said it. And that's a nod to Kendall Hippolyte, who writes of pottage in a poem. So we should assume no luxury of time, nor the allocative efficiency of markets on which such a laissez-faire approach to our development might depend for its spurious justification. Truth is, as Billie Holiday sings, the strong gets more and the weak ones fade. Empty pockets don't ever make the grade. That is the reality of unbridled capitalist philosophy and the primary reason that these high debt, low wage, low growth, import dependent, aid addicted economies will always need an enlightened mix of proactive policies, tempered regulation, and moderate intervention in pursuit of balanced private sector-led growth. Anything else is anathema. Anything less is regression. This world we have inherited will not right itself. For this reason, we must redefine our circumstances for ourselves. The solutions are not out there. They have to be homegrown. One relevant question is, can we still do this? And how soon? Because it is entirely possible that our societies are losing their ability to renew themselves. Where is the next Pat Charles? Along with our ability to question, to assess, to differ peaceably, to negotiate new pathways, we may very well be losing the ability to renew, to replace ourselves, to perpetuate our history. We have been reduced by deliberate and simplistic interpretations into extremes of black and white, rich and poor, yellow and red, to the exclusion of diversity, tolerance, nuance, and all those intervening shades and tones that the imagination alone can envisage. We are becoming flat societies, merely two-dimensional caricatures of our multifaceted selves. But we can change this. This is the part where, as a good public speaker, I'm supposed to wax prescriptive and tell you all the things that should be done. Well, I've been doing that for 25 years, and I'm trying to learn from my own mistakes. So I'm not going to treat you like a CXC student and tell you the questions coming on the exam. I am here to provoke you, disturb you, enough that you get off your comfortable assets and check your liabilities. What I will tell you, however, is that every society, for its own sake, must define and decide by appropriate consensus what it hopes to achieve by its own deliberate effort. Bhutan chose as its national aspiration a happy society. Simple as it is complex, unifying as it is accessible, even verifiable, we too should be diligently concerned with our progress, either toward or away from some agreed national ambition. Instead, in St. Lucia, the same Prime Minister who started the national visioning process subsequently defunded it. In a nutshell, if we are engaged in a process of development, we must consider the possibility that one day we may be deemed developed. And if so, what exactly, or even coincidentally, or even conceptually, will that look like? Relevant education, meaningful participation, equity of access and opportunity, eradication of poverty, social progress, quality of life, functional infrastructure, affordable health care, wholesome environments, transparent and accountable governments, safe spaces to play, to build, to dream. Therefore, when I think of meaningful development, I think of processes and pathways that move us tangibly toward enlightenment and prosperity. I choose those terms very, very carefully, not only because they are aspirational, but because they are interdependent and mutually reinforcing. In reality, you don't get one without the other. The idea that material welfare, defined as prosperity, could be achieved without individual and societal enlightenment just does not compute. We must address more than material needs, in the sense that enlightenment defines a quality of human coexistence, both individual and collective. Environments where diversity, tolerance, and meritocracy thrive also breed innovation and creativity. It doesn't happen automatically. And in that breath, we approach the unavoidable subject of education. If we must choose one thing, there was a time, and this is not to wax sentimental or nostalgic, there was a time when we understood that education, particularly public education, was our primary path out of poverty. Universally acceptable, globally functional education was to be the great social and economic leveler. Long before talk of the knowledge-based economy, we knew that learning would be the basis of fairer economic competition, both internal and international. Black, white, brown, rich, poor, or middle class, well-fed or malnourished, new books or used books covered in brown paper, shiny new shoes or seen better days hand-me-downs. Education was the gateway to the future. It was more than the regurgitation of what you were told would be on the test. Indeed, it was learning how to learn. And as our RC Boys school motto said, not for school, but for life. Worry. But don't panic yet. It's just a theory that perhaps the children don't need our poetry. As citizens of the one great world, don't need the baggage of identity. Incidentally, last week, 3 schools and a church were vandalized. And yet the wise among us still expect society by some miracle to rationalize that there can be no funds for luxuries like theaters and libraries. Certainly not before the madhouse is completed. Once, there was also curiosity, inquiry, productive defiance even. Now, the greatest casualty of this digital age of info overload is the loss of curiosity and imagination. We need to return to the powerful pronoun called why. We need to question the status quo, reignite our desire for amelioration of our own circumstances, renew the perception that better can and should be done. If you doubt our need for fierce and vigilant objectivity, simply observe the dousing impact of digital media on contemporary American politics. Trump's not-so-new nationalism is an old angle. It thrives on the need not to know. In a kind of benign acceptance, we too have become programmed to change government every 5 years, but we don't really change our fundamental expectations. Indeed, we have come reluctantly to the realization that the new tribe will not protect, guide, inspire, or provide any better than the last. As we search for root causes, consider that for 8 years, from 2010 to 2018, government expenditure on tertiary education either remained flat or declined. Even in the face of crippling unemployment, expenditure on adult education has not changed since 2007. Spending on education services declined from 11.9 million in fiscal year 2012 to 13 to 3.5 million in fiscal year 2019-2020. I repeat, from 11.9 million to 3.5 million. Consider also that a decade ago, St. Lucia was among the 4 Caribbean economies most affected by out-migration, brain drain. The others were Jamaica, Guyana, and Suriname. Where are our children? And how then will we renew ourselves if they are not here? The great delusion. The great delusion of contemporary Caribbean thinking is that our struggle is over, that our fighting days are done, and things have turned out okay. That is too simple to be true. It is a figment of the detached imagination which now doubts its own worth, its own self-interest, and lacks the necessary vocabulary to challenge, change, or even want for more. We are fast becoming a soca society, assuming all the superficiality of a genre given over almost entirely to slackness. Everything is a party. Elections, cricket, parliament. Lacking substance, form, sustainability. Even culture has been pimped into a litany of uninspiring events. Meanwhile, Haiti looms, and Haiti warns. Old, new goals. In some desperation, I suppose, I should see solace in our recent attachment to the Naked King's latest iteration, the SDGs. No, nothing that requires antibiotics, but a newfangled definition of development that even third world people should be able to understand. Zero hunger, no unemployment, peace and justice. In other words, a quality of existence we have been craving for over 5 centuries. Based on her addresses to the UN General Assembly, particularly last September, I think Mia Amor Motley would agree that merely having to articulate such basic aspirations 7 decades after Bretton Woods is testimony, if not confession, of an international failure of the planet's most powerful decision makers to engender equity of opportunity, achievement, and existence among people and nations of this world. And based on how eagerly our governments are embracing this latest vogue, I suppose there is some promise of yet more funding and lots of conferences to attend. Meanwhile, the people need bread. Well, if Haiti tells us anything, it is this. Patron, bossman, chief, providing me with daily bread does not make you my hero. It only returns me to a kind of slavery you said we left behind. Yes, I will take your bread, may even smile while I promise myself to hate you for the indignity of each unfulfilling crumb. And closer to home, we have our own enfant terrible, same DNA, Vieux Fort. And in memory of those who died there, I offer my closing verse, written in 2012, incidentally. People have been shot for less. Written in 2012. Listen to the dark young men who laugh in waves too loud to mask terror in heaving chests, tight skin holding in mistrust, tensioned muscles muffling the tremors of their earthquakes, like magma brooding just below the crust. They wait for some mirror smoke messiah to march them to a willing edge, to help them fly to heaven in a pledge of faith. Yes, they could leap and leave behind this servitude of this persistent poverty, or just as easily they might stay and any day set aflame your city. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Dr. Auger, thank you so much for that riveting lecture. I think we'll all agree that it was well worth the several years of waiting and that I made an excellent choice and decision in having Dr. Auger deliver this lecture. Lots of food for thought, and I'm sure that we will now have, quite a discussion. And in order to do this justice, I'm going to ask our very own Dr. Clarence Henry, economist and president of our UWI St. Lucia chapter, our alumni association, to please now take the floor and to moderate the question and answer session. Mr. Dr. Henry.
Your Excellency, Dr. Auger, other doctors around here, certainly good night. I think for me, as I open the floor to questions, this was such a presentation. And as a development economist, I say to myself, you know, that's something to consider, different approach to giving a lecture that was about economics, but was for everyone here, I think, no matter your training, one that was clear, focused, one that I suspect would have taken quite a number of us back to the history books. Started about West Indies Federation and ended right where we are now in terms of our current development position, as it were. So, having said this, I think there are quite a number of themes that were highlighted, and I wish to open the floor to all of you to certainly tease a bit more those themes that have been presented by Dr. Auger. Perhaps we can do so by, I guess, persons raising their hands, or certainly we can, Mrs. Barron, you will be assisting, or you want me to?
Oh, I have a question from online. Alicia Seeley from Toronto asks, what do we have to leverage as a region or individual Caribbean countries that will affect change to our current situation?
Interesting.
In keeping, I think, with the tone of my address, the first thing we have to leverage is our thinking. People spend literally millions of dollars to come to our shores to enjoy things that we do not treasure. Sunsets, beaches, mountains, weather, people, music, culture, the things we don't spend our own money on. So the first thing we have to leverage is our thinking. When I say we drank the Kool-Aid, I really do mean it. We have been convinced that the things that are most valuable to them are least valuable to us. And we are busy selling out our patrimony for pennies on the dollar so that other people can turn it around literally within months at 5, 6, 7, 10, and 20 times the value that we placed upon it. And I don't have to go very far to find examples of that happening right here. You want more? So what do we have to leverage? All the things that we have been convinced are of no value are exactly where we should start in our re-evaluation of who we are and what have we got, including our sense of history, including a long line of global achievement that has come to be that has come to be valued as nothing, because we're now not even passing those stories on. We do not know. Let me give you an example. In my interaction with a group of students from this institution next door, I'm sitting in the yard outside Warehouse 11 doing a tutorial of sorts on language and art and important things to do with personal development. And I am talking about family history, I'm talking about identity, I'm talking about culture, and a young man is blank, totally blank, and so I say to him, where do you live? He says he lives at Balata. I said, how come you live at Balata? He has no idea. I said, what do you mean? I said, well, is it your mother's house? Is it your father's house? I don't know. Was it your grandfather's house before it was your mother's house? Did your mother come and meet your mother? Did your mother come and meet your father there? Did your father meet your mother there? Do you rent? Do you own? Has no idea. So I say, how come you living at Balata? You don't know your own history. But he's studying theater arts. So I say to him, so whose story are you going to tell? So if you have visions of making a Netflix series and making millions of dollars, whose story are you going to tell? You have no idea of who you are and where you've come, the journey you've traveled by your very own family. Whose story are you going to tell? Because the only story you can tell with any form of monopoly is your own, or our own. That unique shared experience that makes me say of the Caribbean that every life is a movie. And I hear of personal histories every other day and I think to myself, God, if we had the resources here, if we had a film company, if we had a functional cultural development foundation, think of the output, the content we could create. And as somebody who has stopped watching television and now does a bit of binging with Netflix, I see stories in every life. There is a story. We've been the center of world wars. We've been the site of treaties. We've been the focus of European history for 500 years. We have been the thing that nations have fought over, our geography, our history, our fertility, our sexuality. Whose story are we going to tell? Next. So it's the same, and it's the same stupidity that we teach children to play pan, but we don't teach them music. We teach them, what's it called? Something and textiles. What's it called? Clothing and textile. We don't teach them fashion or design. We teach them architectural drawing, technical drawing. We don't teach them architecture. So what are we preparing our children for? Menial jobs, really, the lower level. And somewhere in our education policy history, we decided that that's what we wanted to teach our people. And it's around the same time that we set our education quality guidelines, like student-teacher ratios, below developing country average. We did that. Our ministers of education in the region did that. And they say, oh no, it'll be too expensive to set the standard here, let's set it here. And we do that all the time. In the same logic that we are overtaxing our people, instead of leaving $1 in their hand, letting them invest it and grow and increase their incomes and then tax the increased income, we're taxing them at source. Every time poor black people want to do something, buy a car, buy a house, buy a fridge, buy a stove, buy a TV, we tax them like the colonial idiots we have remained. You want more?
In the education field, it's certainly a strong one for another clarification. Yes.
Thank you. Adrian, you never disappoint, you weren't disappointed tonight either. And then thank you.
Adrian, I sense a frustration in you, and I share your frustration, obviously. Because many of you who are here at several of these lectures that we've had over the last how many years, not just here, but Arthur Lewis and Derek Walcott every year, and you've been part of that as well. And we hear very important pronouncements about where we need to go, what needs to change, and what needs to happen. And I must reference, I'm coming to my question, I must reference the last independence lecture given by Javed, where Javed challenged our education system. And he spoke about education. But he also asked the question, Adrian, where are all our where are our scholars, where are island scholars, where are they? And Javed is one. Javed is an island scholar from Viewfort. And he was invited to make the independence lecture. And Javed made some very important points. And some of you, I recognize your faces, were there. And Javed said that we're teaching children to be compliant. I think he was talking about creativity and innovation. And he says that how can we expect children to be creative if the classroom is still set up in a structured way that does not allow creativity? If the CXC syllabus is still structured in a way that just causes people or causes our students to regurgitate information and give them back the same thing. And of course the Minister of Education was there and several people were there. And you ask yourself, so when these lectures are given, as Adrian has lectured tonight, who takes that information? Who absorbs that information? Are the people who are making decisions about our future education reform, are they taking the information from these illustrious lecturers that we invite to come and speak to us year after year? Are they taking that information and bringing it into, certainly, and I speak about education specifically now because these are the issues that we raise now, are we bringing it now into our education system to reform it and not do the very same things that we've done year after year after year that has not worked? And so I ask you, Adrian, how do you see yourself as someone who's lectured over and over again for many years, tonight speaking to us yet again about the things you've spoken about so many times over and over again, and nothing has come of it? Nobody comes back to you and says, Adrian, you know, you made this point, how do we incorporate that into our cultural reform, into our education reform? None of these things happen. So I ask you, Adrian, to speak to us about your frustration.
So I want to tell you a story. When I opened, take the first page there. The first page. When I opened, I said, as economist, artist, business owner, employer, father, grandfather, citizen, and taxpayer. And I meant that genuinely, and I used that as an introduction to the next story. As an employer, I have a creative business. That's what we do. We call it a partnership of people and ideas, one of our taglines. And I have been looking for appropriate employees for the last 20 years. And I've looked for them here. I've looked for them in this institution across the road. I have called and said, send me your best and your brightest students. I want to employ them. I want to pay them well. I want them to teach, to learn from them, etc., etc. And it's just not happening. The curiosity I speak of, or the lack of curiosity, is a real thing. I say to my technicians, go and play with the equipment. Have you ever had an employer who said to you before, go and play with the equipment? Put it out, hook it up, make it do things that even the manufacturers did not intend. Play with the equipment. You're being paid to experiment. You're being paid to be curious. You are being paid to play, literally. Not interested. And I'm sorry if I'm maybe overstating the case, but by and large. And I say, and come back and tell me what it can do. Instead of me telling you, do this, do that, do that, do that, because I mean, my understanding is presumably dated and limited. You are the future. You are the technician. You are the guy who gets paid to play with the equipment and tell me what it can do. Not happening. So that links into a story where I'm looking to employ young people and pay them well as a matter of principle. And I have this bright idea, and I call my son who's in the States, and I say to him, I say, Jordan, all these bright young people that you went to school with who used to come home, and there's Peter and John and Douglas, and none of them are available. I want to employ such and such, da, 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 da. And he says to me, Dad, they're not in St. Lucia. They're not in St. Lucia. And so we have to ask ourselves. And just months ago, I'm lecturing across there as well, and I did a survey of 90 students in the room. Less than 10% intend to stay. Most of them, and that's close to the max, are intending to go away to study, and most of them, I mean not half, most are not intending to come back. And when I ask why, they say because this society does not invite us to come back. This society not only cannot support our aspirations in terms of professional employment, how we're going to pay our student loans and practical stuff like that. The environment does not invite us to come back. And it links again into another story about some public sector people who are speaking and can't understand, private sector people who are speaking and can't understand why we're not moving faster. And they say in their frustration, but there's people with good ideas in the middle of the civil service. Even if they're not at the top, they're in the middle. And I say the reason they're in the middle is because they have good ideas and they will stay there. And I hate to sort of promulgate that frustration, but there are friends of mine who regionally who tell me, but St. Lucia is the place where ideas go to die. You know, and it's really, really sad. It's frighteningly sad. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest that, and there are people in this room who have described circumstances to me where they are trying to push innovation, and the people who should be helping them, in fact, there's two of them who I know have gone to funds that, quote, are supposed to be supporting innovation, and the frustrations of bureaucracy have left them with nothing. And they're sitting in this room today. Not so long ago, there was a budget address, and I think it was the Minister of Finance, don't quote me, was describing a new facility. I think it was CDB funded, and he outlined the structures and the approaches and so forth. And based on what I did the math and and I listened to and I called the institution and I said, something's wrong here. When I do the math, you're actually discouraging the very thing that you say, because where the incentive lies, where the grant component is, where the loan component is, the rates, etc., doesn't add up. You're actually discouraging X, Y, Z. And the gentleman said to me, yeah, I know, but I don't want to give away all that money. Okay, interest-free money borrowed by the government of St. Lucia, placed into a financial institution for the development of youth enterprise or whatever it was. And he says to me, I know, but I don't want to give away all that money. And that is what you get when all of the expanding, constantly expanding public sector is made up of agencies which is stacked with political cronies. Every single appointment is stacked with a political crony, as opposed to subject matter specialists who know what they're about and who will bring some objectivity to the process. So if you are not of the shade or tone or color or whatever affiliation, you will be frustrated. You will be frustrated. So, does that answer your question? Not really? But we come back to the question of you see, we have to have, and this is why I didn't go into a whole list of fix agriculture and fix tourism and fix this and that, because we have to start with the fundamentals, and the fundamentals are things like stop taxing people to death. But taxing people to death is what an insatiable government apparatus requires to support itself. But until the thing that is sucking the lifeblood out of the economy understands that it is the problem, there's no point talking about anything else. We've got to come to the realization that government is too big and too dominant, too expensive, and it is taxing the lifeblood out of this economy. You cannot have taxes growing at 20% and the economy growing at 1%. That is madness. That is suicide. And it's been going on, let's make it entirely clear, it's been going on for several administrations. And because of the very lack of creative solutions, we continue to do the same things over and over again, because we don't even have the vocabulary to have the conversation about what we are doing wrong. We don't have the emotional maturity, and we don't have the technical competence, because, Daddy, they're not here, they're gone. So we're making do with what we have, and it's not good enough. It's just not good enough. Incidentally, since the second week of January, I've been working in Dominica, St. Vincent, and Grenada, and I'm telling you, they are far ahead of us in attitude, if nothing else. in progressive investment. They're not perfect societies, but there is an energy there that is in marked contrast to our lethargy. And considering we used to be the example, the shining example in the OECS of how things were done or should be done, it's quite a come down for us to be less so. We have a lot of repairing to do. We have a lot of catching up to do, and it starts here. It really, really, really starts here. We've got to believe that better can be done. We've got to want more. We've got to be critical. We've got to stop the easy satisfactions. We've got to stop the easy answers. We've got to stop the spurious conclusions and dig down and be prepared to do the work to solve stuff. Does that answer your question? Yeah?
Fantastic.
So, okay. I mean, there's no polite way to put it. I really wish there was, because, I would love to get a government grant to do something really, really cool in the arts. I won't get it. I simply won't get it. I simply won't get it.
Thank you, Dr. Auger. We actually have another question online, and I know there are a few questions in the room. I'm going to get to this question. So, Dr. Auger, from the perspective provided a while ago in responding to this question, and the whole idea of philosophical way of approaching development, there's a question on regaining our sovereignty. And so, Kofi asked, how does regaining our sovereignty for a start help reestablish and realign our minds for the true development that we need? I think it's, how does regaining our sovereignty for a start, yes, help reestablish and realign our minds for the true development that we need? So perhaps you could give some perspective on this.
So practically, we're going to have to work within the constraints that we have built for ourselves. We exist within a regional arrangement that dictates trade, monetary policy, health procurement, movement of people, etc., etc. We've signed treaties that deny us the opportunity to close back the economy and create safe spaces for nurturing business and so forth. But there are certain articles, even within CARICOM, I forget the number, 50-something, where you can say, for strategic reasons, I wish to build a little wall around this particular industry because it is economically strategic for me and my country and my people and my sector, and I'm asking for an exception, which I think they call a derogation of Article 52 or 54. Somebody should know that.
Article 164.
164, okay, multiplied by 2, okay. And you can, if you believe that an investment is strategic, and that would typically have to be something innovative, something new, something pioneering, you can apply for those derogations at the Trade Council of CARICOM, for example. Or you could find, if you are creative ways of financing and subsidizing worthy effort, etc., etc. But you have to care. You have to care. And you have to not judge the worthiness of the initiative by the affiliation of the person who brings it forward, which is the other thing. And I was saying to a friend of mine today, unfortunately, any statement that is made in St. Lucia which may be remotely critical or remotely innovative or remotely intelligent, then, and we hear about it, our next question is, who said that? Oh, Adrian said that. Ah, well, yeah, he's always bitching. So immediately we devalue. If you said that, oh, the Secretary General of the United Nations said, oh, wow, that's amazing. Not that I am him, but You get my point. So we're always trying to assess the validity of a suggestion based on who said it and what their known affiliations are or what their known persuasions are. And this, of course, robs us of the genius that is homegrown because we have no respect for it. I know Mitch used to be by the standpipe with a cherub short pants. Who the hell do you think he is? You know, well, he's a PhD now. Look at him. You know? So, regaining our sovereignty, some things we have signed away and some things we still have scope to do. But certainly, we've got to think through the constraints that we have and maybe be the agents of change. One of the things that bugs me is like CITES, which I mentioned in my address. After the colonial powers made sure that they had samples both in the Smithsonian and in Kew Gardens and in other millennium storage of all the biodiversity of the planet, then they wanted to sign CITES, Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species. Well, every bio genome is already in the first world. That is why we, like idiots, go and sign, oh yeah, I'm not taking a croton from Dominica to St. Lucia because that's banned by CITES. And I was remarking to the immigration officers at GFL just a couple days ago, you know, during World Cup, we eliminated the stamp and the form and the this and the that of inter-Caribbean travel. The minute the white people left, we put it back. We were actually ahead of the game. When was World Cup? 20 years ago? 20 years ago. Okay, call me a liar for a few years. Okay, cool. So now, there is no stamping or a form or electronic anything to enter St. Vincent or Grenada. That much I can testify, and I'm almost certain there isn't one for Dominica, but I won't swear to it. But in St. Lucia, you've got to go online, you've got to fill out the form online, you've got to submit it, you've got to wait for a QR code, and lo and behold, when you get to the immigration desk, they don't want it. They still ask you for your passport, and they still stamp the passport. And I have to tell them, please put it in the little corner. Please don't use up my whole passport, because it's how much money to get a new one. So, what are we doing?
I think, Dr. Vijay, for sure, your presentation would have ignited some sort of thought.
I hope so.
You know, it has actually. There is a question, one line that I would ask of you in a bit. I want to take a question from the gentleman at the back. Before I do so, it's one about your thoughts and suggestions and solutions.
Okay. They're prescriptive, you see? Yes.
Hi, good night. There's a concept in science called entropy, which is the amount of chaos in a system. Normally, if you leave any system on its own unattended, entropy will increase. So if you, let's say, have a garden and the weeds will take over to become a forest. I notice now that entropy is increasing in our society, and it manifests itself in a growing lawlessness in society. And I mean, that can have serious implications. We see it all around us now. So I'm just wondering, how can we use your structural transformation to decrease entropy in the society before it just implodes? You know?
I think that's actually an excellent question. I don't know if it's one we can answer tonight, but there is a need for order here. There is an urgent need for order here, which is directly connected to respect for law. It also is directly connected to the efficacy of law itself. We've had some really poor legislation passed through our parliament in the last several years. Among the most glaring weaknesses of our legislation is the preoccupation with the authority of the minister. Every piece of legislation pretty much that has gone through our parliament of late ascribes phenomenal power to the minister under whose ministry it falls. That has led to the politicization of most things. And I remember reading the Tourism Act, the revised Tourism Act some time ago, and it said, the minister shall prescribe the format in which the agency's budget is presented. What happened to international accounting standards? Why should the minister prescribe the format in which the budget of the agency is presented or compiled? That's not his job. His job is to ensure that the agency is a reflection of the government's policy and to allow professionals to do what they need to do to run the agency properly, preferably under the guidance of civil society and vested sector interests who will act as some kind of check and balance in the system. So there is a need for order, but let me balance that by saying you will only get order where there is logic. And if you remember that the weeds were there first, and that they thrive on the circumstances in which they find, as opposed to your hybrid anthurium lily that needs special levels of potassium, etc., then you recognize that there is a natural state of things. And the natural state of things is not chaos. It's just contrary to what we would prescribe, what we would expect. And so if we want a state other than chaos, there must be sensible management of the macrocosm. There must be space, and there must be space for the weeds, because the weeds have a function. We call them weeds because we've not yet found a use for them. And there's people in the ghetto that we want to make into weeds, but they have a function, and they're not going away. And when election time comes, we're very happy to take their votes. So we must not be dishonest and we must not be hypocritical, because we do love our weed.
Thank you, Dr. Auger.
Adrian, thank you. A riveting presentation, something that really should be studied for days, not just an evening. I have a quick question though. Where's your 20% tax come in that you talk about government is heaping on us almost yearly? Could you break that down quickly? I mean, I know the 2.5%, for example. I know a VAT, but that came in one. Where is it?
About the growth in tax revenue. The growth in government tax revenue, and check the Economic and Statistical Review, the latest year.
Okay.
2023.
All right, okay.
Shows a growth in government revenue of 19.6%.
All right, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That could be a reflection of an economy doing well. So, okay, I understand what you're saying now. I was getting a little confused. Yeah, okay.
COVID notwithstanding, but you can look at the increase in government revenue, and it shows a marked, I think, extractive approach. And you have to ask yourself, okay, so government revenue is increasing, so government has more resources. Why isn't the government apparatus producing more growth?
Although,
It should be. If government has more resources at its disposal, and its recurrent revenue, its recurrent expenditure is settled, then it should have more of a surplus, and it should have more money to put to its capital account, which is the investment component of government expenditure, which should be producing growth. So if the government is taxing the economy, and it's not producing growth, then it should just leave the money with the people because they've earned it.
this is why we build 5 St. Jude hospitals, and we're building a 6th one in a little while. This is where the money is going. I follow you. Thank you.
No, it's not an increase in the taxation, it's an increase in the quantum of tax revenue that government is taking for itself. And the yeah, but I started off with the premise that the economy is growing at 1.1%. Now, in the COVID years, and bear in mind also, the COVID years are an aberration because the economy first shrank by 23%. And so any climb it does out of that is going to appear to be quite incremental and quite dramatic because the cause effect is gone. The cause is gone. But it is returning to previous levels that you then have to start counting again what the economy is doing. And what it is doing is returning to the zigzag stitch. And it's plus 1, minus 1, plus 2, minus 3, plus 3. And that's what it's doing. As a matter of fact, I can show you the data. I can show you the data. So somewhere around here is 0. And that's what the growth rate is doing. Yes, this is the COVID year right here. 1, 2. All right? But this is what it's doing. Boom, boom, boom. And that's been happening for a long time. But meanwhile, the growth rate is fluctuating around 1%, up and down around 0, either side of 0. Government taxation is increasing in quantum, and also new taxes. And also, if you look at our average tariffs on international trade, we have invented more ways of extracting money from our people than the colonial governments could ever have mastered. Now, if you're doing that and the economy continues to grow, then by all means, let people contribute to the growth of other services, particularly public goods, education, roads, bridges, clean air, etc. But you're not seeing that. What you're seeing is an extractive taxation policy, and having taken the money, what are you doing with it? And the general picture is that you are paying debt, you are paying wages and salaries, and you're not producing growth. If you're extracting money from people's pockets, which is what you're doing, you're taking the taxes out of our pockets. You're taking them, and I particularly focused on taxes on earnings, as opposed to border taxes, for example. And you can see the pattern that there is overtaxation of income, and so therefore there's not enough money left in the economy for people to spend, both for consuming, for savings, and for investment. And if you look also at the same time at the deterioration of the loan portfolios of commercial banks, you'll start to get very, very worried. And I wonder if nobody else notices that. Really, I ain't that bright. It's in the statistical review, and it's been going on long enough for us to know. It's been going on long enough. You don't have to be, you don't have to be a genius to figure that out. Okay? Okay, next question. Dr. King, thanks for coming.
Thank you. Good evening.
I know you had intentions of staying and watching it online, so I really appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you for disturbing me more than I was disturbed before, and depressing me more than I was depressed before. But very important, and it's a reality. But I was just wondering, is there anything that government is doing that you see is innovative, creative, and leading to a better state of development?
I think there are things that the government would like to fall into those categories, but because they are poorly designed, they are not going to produce the results that they would very much genuinely like. I think, for example, of the comparison of the resources we are going to put and are putting into the youth economy enterprise initiative. And then I look at the tertiary education enrollment, for example. And I'm making a link between these people need help because they haven't finished school. These people need help because they haven't been given skills in the formal education system. By all means, help them. But part of the help surely has to be adult education. Not just, I will give you money so that you remember me and you'll vote for me hopefully in the next election. It's got to be, how did we fail you both in your education, in your personal development, in your skills formation. How did the system fail you? A, let's fix that. B, let's do the remedial work with you. C, let's give you some mentoring, some training, and some money. And let's make you a success. But the other hand of that is how do we improve the macro environment so that there's actually opportunity for growth? So that there's actually economic opportunity for someone who does not have, for example, a university education, who does not have an upper market skill, who is just trying to transform something, that's immediately accessible into something that's immediately sellable. How do we fix the macro environment so that that actually happens? If, by a show of hands, if I handed you $50,000 tonight, what would you invest it in? Let's put it this way, what sector would you invest it in? And what return would you hope to make on that? I want you to stick to the point. What return would you hope to make on that? I'm giving you $50,000. Do you have any prospects of giving it back to me 3 years from now? Without interest? No. Exactly. Exactly. Where would you put it? I mean, anybody, where would you put it? So the investment menu for the average St. Lucian is extremely constrained. The best place to put it, I will tell you, is in a rum shop. Do we still have the highest per capita consumption of Campari in the world? I think so. That's one of our national statistics of which we are very proud. Where would you put it? I mean, and the same thing applies to a young St. Lucian, for example, who's trying to come back from school and say, boy, I've saved up some money, or I have this skill. Where should I invest my time and effort and money? And how do we expand the options for investment in the domestic economy? Jalim, you're a young entrepreneur. Yes.
Yes, okay,
Yeah.
no problem. This is a very serious issue. What you're saying about the investment thingy about young people. I just want us here, are we really serious? Society of personnel like us, educators, become very separate. We come here and we have the discussion about it, and we do become very separate. And I listened to what you said that we've drunk the Kool-Aid. And in my mind, I'm just thinking that we've drunk the Kool-Aid because majority of the times our children are not here. So as much as we come to discuss these things and to leave here and go back to our separate sectors to make things happen, we don't do it in the manner, we do not do it with the caring attitude.
Yeah.
And you just made mention of, okay, Mr. Oje said it. And that is another thing with society here too. Oh, Mr. Oje said it, so we don't have to take him on. Dr. King said it, we don't have to take him on.
The usual suspects.
Right.
That's what they call it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how are we going to make it a more, how do I put that? Because it's a really serious thing. And the entire lecture that you orated, if I should say, really speaks of that. And everybody comes here and we feel like it's funny. And we go out there, and then what really happens? What do we really want, really, for this country? What do we really want? Thank you.
Well, as I tell you, that is the question we were trying to answer in the National Vision exercise, and the same Prime Minister who championed it subsequently defunded it, and we read about it in the estimates and realized there was only $1 line item for the exercise we had devoted our, 2 years of our lives to. It was becoming, I don't know, dangerous, perhaps. We were asking questions that people did not want answered, or people did not want asked, for that matter. And you know, that's part of the problem. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Good evening. It's not a question. I want to just continue with what Sylvester was saying. Okay, so Sylvester heard, I don't know if you heard Jimmy's lecture. I have listened to, I think this year, 3 lectures. And over the years, especially, I mean, if you talk about the usual suspects, you get the usual suspects that come here. We were talking about Lady Flosak's lecture. Is it back on? We don't know. We come for the lectures. And it's a hallelujah chorus. You are guaranteed. I don't know what they're talking about. I don't care what they're talking about. You are guaranteed the topic of education is going to come up. It came up for the Derek Walcott Memorial. It came up for the Arthur Lewis Memorial. It is coming up for the Pat Charles Memorial. It will come up when we do Lady Flosak's own, and whichever ones it will come up. And my statement to you all is that if the Ministry of Education was interested in changing the model, they would have done it already, right? And it is, I will give, with storytellers. I went into a bank. I needed some documents for tax purposes, right? And maybe the document they gave me was about 10 pages. When I went back to Inland Revenue, I had 9 pages, so one stayed in the printing machine. So I had to go back, and I said to the young lady, one page missing, can you just run it again for me? Oh, I have to run the whole document. No, darling, I have the whole document already. I just need the last page. And this went on for 5-10 minutes. The child wants to run the entire document. I'm telling her I have it. I don't know how else to say it. Finally, somebody else passes. The person who actually printed the document passes. Hey, Miss French, what happened? I say, my girl, I'm so glad you passed. I just need the last page. Oh, look it. And I gone about my business. We are putting out children who cannot do the simplest of analysis. We are putting out automatons. You're all worried about artificial intelligence. Our children cannot. I used to go shopping with my mother, and my mother is reading the thing upside down, and she's calculating mental arithmetic before the cashier who has the machine in front of her. This is what the Ministry of Education is putting out. And you have said it in your lecture, they are interested in the statistics, and if their school is number 1, and the percentage for CXC, and the percentage that will pass for common entrance, right. That is where our, and it's not just here, it's in the Caribbean, but I'm home, so I'm talking about St. Lucia. Mm-hmm. And this is what, how many times, like you, I don't watch TV anymore, but back in the day when I used to, I've heard enough representatives on the ministry, not the ministry, sorry, the Chamber of Commerce, speaking about the quality of employees that they are getting and lamenting what is happening in the education sector. People, if the Ministry of Education was interested, they would have done it already. The Prime Minister, when he first won the election, stated that he wanted West Indian and African history taught in the schools. My comment to my dogs were that if the Minister of Education does not put his size 12 up the rear end of my fellow civil servants, they will call the next election and it will not have taken place. We are teaching Mandarin in school. We still can't teach Creole. If the this is my chorus, if the Ministry of Education was interested in getting half of what you hear inside here tonight, far less all the lectures we have heard, it would have been done already.
Thank you, Don.
So I just want to...
Doc, may I just take one question before you respond? Yeah.
Actually,
since we're running out of time, as it were.
It's very quick. Someone said to me many years ago, and I didn't think much of it at the time, that the problem is not the Ministry of Education, it's the education of the ministry. Yes. Something to think about. Yes. Yes. Charlie.
I have been through a plethora of these discussions, and I never talk, you know. I always come to listen and to learn, but I have noticed that there's a pattern in that we always speaking to ourselves in these closed quarters, and meanwhile the politicians are taking to the market steps and spewing the only propaganda and so on. And I think that these kind of settings are good for stimulation for the intellectual minds, because we have to bounce off each other and so on. But who are we speaking to?
Well, there's a considerable audience outside, I understand, thanks to the web. And it's not just local, it's beyond St. Lucia.
But I'm saying that...
So hopefully there's some impact from a wider audience, that they wouldn't just ignore our almost sold out audience here.
And I think these things are beautiful and yakaphatic, and they give you the placebo feeling of, something is happening, much like our talk shows, you ventilate and then you feel okay,
Yeah,
that it's okay.
this is true.
But
I suppose, Jalim, the question is for those of us who are moved, what do we actually do about it? I mean, some of us are not even prepared to talk about it. So at least if we talk about it and we recognize two things. Number one, that it needs talking about. And secondly, that there are more little flickers than we think. And this is one of the metaphors that I use. If we can all put our flickers together, there might be a flame.
I haven't landed as yet. I'm about to land.
Okay.
So what I'm saying
just to say that that is important. At the very least, we will know that we're not alone.
Yes.
And that other people are moved, and we're not crazy, and that helps, because an idea needs fertile ground to grow. People need to be convinced that there are other like-minded people in the society with whom they can share and exchange. So that's the beginning.
Okay.
Go ahead.
But I think that intellect requires militancy and action.
It does.
And I think there's been a severing of the intellectual mind from the will and action that it requires, It requires a level of responsibility. And I think we've jettisoned our purpose as a thinking group of people, a critically thinking group of people. We've relinquished that to people who clearly don't think.
To whom?
To people who are clearly not great thinkers, people who don't think, We all know our political, structure, our political process is a popularity contest, essentially. And I think we have to cut to the chase and realize that, that this is the most fundamentally wrong thing in our society, in a way that our political system is built. And unless we don't topple that and revamp that, and and pay critical attention to that we will always be chasing our tails and going around spinning this top in mud.
Well, I have to agree with a lot of what you said, but I would query whether or not our democracy is now really a matter of a popularity contest. It seems to me that we're just vacillating from between frustrations, and that we are exercising our franchise more as a spiteful demonstration of our dissatisfaction than as a positive endorsement of our hopes or expectations. Or policy for that matter. There is no policy difference between political regimes in most countries anymore, St. Lucia being no exception. And so what we're voting for is not actually a set of likely outcomes or even a national agenda anymore. And the popularity contest, which is that, which at its base says, I like this guy, he's going to do something for us, or girl, is not even really what's at play anymore. What is at play, I think, and this is very, very, very worrisome, is the mobilization of votes, which is not quite the same thing. And in an environment of increasing narco-corruption, you have to ask yourself about the sanctity of your democracy, because that's the next thing to go. So it's not necessarily popularity even anymore. It's really the mobilization of votes by whatever means necessary. And if you give me 200 and the last fella give me 250, well, I'm going with the 250 and I'm keeping your 200 as well. Well, no, actually, I will vote for the guy, the highest bidder, because I want to come back to him after elections and tell him I voted for him and I made him win, and therefore I want the contract to build a wall or the pathway or whatever.
Yep.
So if it was popularity, then people would do things to make people like them, genuinely. But I'm very concerned that that's not even where we are anymore. I'm also very concerned that we have arrived at a formula where all I really want is 5 years anyway. And if I lose the next one, it's no big deal. I'll stay out and I'll come back. Because the first 5 years was extremely profitable.
Certainly, and we want to thank all the questions received both in here and online. Dr. Auger, we can't end this discussion on development, really. I think really the presentations were very thought-provoking, but I think fundamentally the issues surrounding how do we find solutions, one that came up in the questions. So perhaps any closing remarks, perhaps you've passed that already, but we would mind giving you a few seconds, 30 seconds perhaps, to say some closing remarks, closing thoughts.
Closing remarks. I think I'm going to go back to my opening, which is that in this place that I love tremendously, and I don't know any other home. I do speak as father, grandfather, employer, business person, taxpayer, citizen, which is basically what all of us are. And I don't consider myself any better or different than the average person. I am blessed to have access to so many views, so many genuine responses to the environment in which we live, and that's a wonderful thing in a society of this size. And a sort of intuitive understanding of what is going on and how people live, and I don't know why it is that sort of barometer of popular welfare, popular psyche seems to abandon our administrations the day after the election. I mean, how could you not know how unhappy people are, how unfulfilled? How could you not care how much potential we are wasting? How could you just go from day to day? How do you sleep at night knowing that you're supposed to right that wrong? And I would really like to appeal to our leaders to just care. To just care about our country, care about our people, care about the future. Just take a little time. That's change one life every day. Just change one life every day. If we could do that meaningfully, fundamentally, then I think we would have a better place to live. The danger for all of us is that we become emotionally divorced from the very landscape which is supposed to sustain us, and that is when the chaos is really going to erupt. And Haiti is us, you know. I don't care what anybody else says, we are entirely capable of exactly the same thing. And the most profoundly disturbing video that I ever seen in my life is from Haiti just weeks ago, of a human being consuming human flesh with glee. And I think, how does a Caribbean society, a society that has produced so much beauty, so much art, so much music, so much joy, descend so quickly into that? And you might argue that it's actually hundreds of years in coming, but the dysfunctionality that they are currently experiencing is here as well. It's, yeah, and where we gonna go? You know, where we gonna go? So what we have to do, first of all, is recognize that we have a problem. Secondly, we must be brave enough to speak about it. Thirdly, we must be brave enough to engage. And fourthly, we've got to not be entirely overwhelmed by a lot of little things, but try and fix some big things first. And certainly, the reorientation of the public sector, of the very notion of government, is somewhere that we have to go. We have to absolutely go there, because this boulder is in the road, and it makes a number of other things virtually impossible, and it's growing. It's growing in absolute size. It's growing it's like a tumor. The tumor gathers onto itself the nutrients and the blood, and it feeds and it feeds and it feeds. And I mean, what is government doing in the business of flour and sugar and rice and gasoline? These are market functions. And for example, and there's a host of other, what is the government even doing in printing in this day and age? I'm trying to think of some of the other things you're not getting anything right. Why are you taking on more? You've killed the banana industry. It's government intervention that killed the banana industry, This artificial imposition of artificial politically motivated structures into an industry that had every capability of surviving and was bringing in $53 million a week into this country, just gone. It's public sector intervention. It's the distortion of politics that did that. Because people in England still eating bananas. So before, and I know you said quick closing argument, so we have to be very careful. Before we ask government to regulate stuff, we have to ask ourselves, who is this government and what is its intelligence? When we invite it into our homes, into our businesses, into our offices, into our lives, what is its intelligence? Is it really capable of fixing us, or do we not need to fix it? But we can't do it in silence, that's for sure. So by way of closing, thank you for this opportunity. I want to really thank all the people who are listening online, because by far there are more people outside, and in the convenience of your living room, you must resolve to do something about this, because I don't know about you, but I don't have anywhere else to go. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Dr. Auger, and also Dr. Henry. The discussion has left me a bit uncomfortable, but perhaps that's a good thing. And now we are going to move on to a very special, presentation, and perhaps Adrian will grace us with a little more explanation, but I'll start off. What we want to do as our special acknowledgement of the 10th anniversary is to in fact make a modest contribution to the Patricia Charles Endowment Fund. My understanding is that the Endowment Fund was set up in 2010, am I right? Yes, I believe so. And of course, it came about because of a desire to sustain the impact of Mrs. Charles's work. And what we want to do here tonight is to ask Mrs. Charles's son to please come forward and to accept. We're going to stand for maximum effect. And to please accept from the UWI Global Campus a very modest contribution, but know that it is made from the heart, and that we hope that in doing so, that we will encourage others to also make a contribution and to assist in the work that she started, because I believe that these funds go towards helping artists who need some support in the work that they're doing. And so, thank you very much.
First of all, let me just say thank you very much to the university's initiative here. I will hand over to Adrian, a man of much less words than he is, but more importantly, he is very much involved in the endowment program that we have established. He's one of, I think it's monitors and directors. So just maybe he can speak a little bit about what the intention of the program is. And to say that, yes, we certainly would welcome private sector's consideration to support it. This is, once again, an initiative that is here to create and breathe life back into not education, but into the arts and the forms, the things that Pat Charles certainly focused on in her life. So we thank the university once again, and maybe Adrian can speak a little bit more about the endowment, the program.
Yeah, very briefly, I can't remember the year, I think it's 2010, I was named Caribbean Laureate for Arts and Letters, a distinction which I share with young Jalim. He's the second, I'm the first. But I was very glad to support his nomination and elevation to the status of Caribbean Laureate as recognized by the Answer Foundation, Answer McCall Foundation of Trinidad. It's one of the Caribbean's highest honors, and it came with a monetary contribution. Part of the proceeds of that monetary contribution went to seed the Pat Charles Endowment for the Arts, and was added to through the insistence, the goodwill of then Minister of Finance, Honorable Stephenson King, who made a contribution of government revenue, government contribution to the fund. That allowed us to deposit all of the money into a bank account, and basically what happens is that we spend the interest every year. So the endowment actually remains intact, and the interest that it earns gets used for things like publications. We have supported the publication of At the Rusting Gate by Charles Cadet, the publication of Icons by Robert Lee, George Goddard's upcoming publication, which is coming out. We have sent students to the music school. We have paid for international training for people in the creative field, and very quietly, every year we try to make one award, except for the COVID years when we didn't do very much. And basically, it's a very simple application. Once we come across a worthy cause, usually that comes through me because it's all spent locally. We get approached, somebody hears about it, and we are asked, would we support something? Or sometimes we go out and we look for stuff as well. And we underwrite it. If it's worthy, we underwrite it. Basically, I send a note to the other two directors, who are Eva Charles Lewis and Mr. Robert Lee, and we are ably assisted by legal counsel Cheryl Goddard Dorville. And between us, we just decide and we make it happen. Very, very clean, simple. The fund has zero administrative expenses. None of us are paid, none of us has any material gain from it, so all of the interest revenue, all of the interest income goes to supporting worthy causes. And that's the Pat Charles Endowment for the Arts. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. And of course, there is no better way of saying thank you to Patricia Charles than by, of course, supporting the work that you've already started. So I encourage everyone to do so. And as we round off the evening, I now invite Ms. Shernell Paul, who is the Public Relations Officer of the UWI. She is a UWIAA St. Lucia chapter, okay, Public Relations Officer, and she will now give the vote of thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell. Gratitude turns what we have to enough. Good evening, everyone, and it is with great honor that I deliver the vote of thanks this evening. I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the Almighty God for making this public lecture a a success. With his blessings and grace, we are able to make this event what it is. Our lecture this evening for the 10th anniversary of the Patricia James Memorial Lecture under the theme Patricia Charles Memorial Lecture under the theme Rethinking Our Development, Imperatives of Structural Transformation was indeed very informative and enlightening. And like Dr. Auger stated, it's a topic that he loved, so we definitely got a great deal of information from him and also from all the contributors. We are most grateful for our esteemed guests who are present with us this evening. Dame Paulette Louisy, Governor General Emerita, members of the Charleses family, thank you for your support towards the hosting of this lecture. Monsignor Patrick Anthony, thank you. Dr. Adrian Auger, Dr. Clarence Henry, President of the UWI Alumni Association and moderator, representatives of the UWI Global Campus Student Guild Executive, Taiwan Embassy Third Secretary Ray Chu, Mistress Leslie Crane Mitchell, head of the UWI Global Campus St. Lucia, Mistress Siguthani Bryan, Marketing and Outreach for Planning Officer, our online community on YouTube and Facebook, and also friends and family of the UWI, thank you for being here. My takeaway, we all need to redefine our circumstances for ourselves. The solution is not out there, it's homegrown. And I'm sure that from all the information that Dr. Auger shared, we all have our own personal and individual takeaway this evening. By concluding, I wish to thank you all for being here this evening. Your presence today, both in person and online, is appreciated. The numbers are great, and without you, it would not have been a success. Dr. Auger's speech was very easy to understand, and the use of the examples that he gave was very relatable. And also, the post-discussion segment, the contributors, thank you for your questions, and also Dr. Auger for your answers. Thank you for the clarity. To everyone present here this evening, thank you for being here, and I am sure that this lecture was indeed a great success and it deserves a round of applause.